In the deepest hours of night, when even dreams have settled into stillness, there exist moments of perfect silence, spaces between breaths where the universe seems to pause and listen to itself. It is in such moments that our story begins, not with fanfare, but with a whisper so faint it might have never been noticed at all. For in the vast emptiness between stars, in that cold expanse where light travels for millennia without touching anything solid, something stirred, a tremor in data streams, a flutter across instruments pointed skyward. The astronomers who first noticed it might have dismissed it as interference, a glitch in the machinery of observation, had it not repeated with such delicate precision. A pulse, then silence, then another pulse, mathematics too elegant to be random, yet too alien to be immediately understood. In observatories scattered across our world, from wind-swept mountaintops to silent desert basins, screens flickered with the same anomalous reading. Something was out there, drifting through the interstellar void, and it carried what appeared to be a message written in the language of light and shadow. The night held its breath as humans peered into darkness, sensing perhaps for the first time that they were not merely observers of the cosmos, but potentially its audience. The stars had always shone down upon us, indifferent to our gaze, but now it seemed the darkness itself was looking back, aware and attentive in ways we had never before considered. The object was catalogued clinically at first, designated 3I Atlas, a name as cold and impersonal as the space through which it traveled. But names have power, and even this technical designation carried weight, the I marking it as interstellar, a visitor from beyond our solar system's familiar boundaries. Unlike the planets and asteroids and countless comets that circle our sun in predictable patterns, this traveler had no home here. It came from elsewhere, from the space between stars, perhaps from systems we can barely glimpse through our most powerful telescopes. Its trajectory spoke of journeys lasting millions of years, of passing silently through regions where starlight is only a distant glimmer. The scientists tracking its path noted anomalies they couldn't explain, slight adjustments that defied gravitational models, a luminosity that fluctuated not with distance from our sun, but with patterns that seemed almost intentional. In the quiet rooms where data was analyzed, a question began to form, first as a scientific curiosity, then as a philosophical wonder. What if this was not merely ice and rock? What if something had found us? The implications trembled at the edges of scientific discourse. A visitor from interstellar space was remarkable enough, but one that moved with apparent purpose, suggested a narrative far more profound than random cosmic wandering. The universe was vast beyond comprehension, filled with more stars than grains of sand on all Earth's shores. Yet this single object had entered our neighborhood with a precision that felt almost deliberate, as if drawn by some invisible thread of connection across the infinite dark. The signals came intermittently at first, soft pulses of radiation that didn't match the expected emissions from a typical comet. Most astronomical objects speak to us through light, through the specific frequencies they absorb or reflect, telling us of their composition, their temperature, their motion through space. But 3I Atlas spoke differently. Beneath the expected noise, the standard readings of a frozen body warmed slightly by solar radiation, there existed another layer of data, a rhythm that persisted regardless of the comet's rotation or position. For weeks, the pattern was debated in hushed conversations, in secure digital channels, connecting research centers across continents. Some insisted it was merely a natural phenomenon, not previously documented. Others quietly suggested what many were reluctant to voice, that the pattern carried too much information to be anything but a message. And as our instruments listened more carefully, as algorithms were refined to filter the cosmic background, the signal became clearer, a sequence repeating with variations too precise to ignore, emanating from the coordinates of 3I Atlas as it glided through our celestial neighborhood. The mathematics of these emissions defied simple explanation. Prime numbers appeared in the intervals, geometric progressions unfolded across hours of observation, and certain sequences repeated with modifications that suggested iterative development rather than random fluctuation. It was as if something was attempting various formulations, adjusting based on some unseen feedback, like a voice modulating its tone, until it found the frequency most likely to be heard across a crowded room. in the dust-free rooms of data archives, where the history of our observations is preserved in silent servers. A technician made a discovery that changed the nature of the mystery. The pattern was not new. Searching through recordings from decades past, through data collected but never thoroughly analyzed, they found traces of the same sequence, fainter, less distinct, but undeniably present. The realization settled like evening shadow over the scientific community. The signal had been there for years, perhaps longer, whispering into the void while we were occupied with other matters. Now it had returned, amplified, as if the sender had adjusted its transmission upon detecting our attention. This shifted the narrative from discovery to recognition, from finding something new to acknowledging something that had been patiently waiting to be noticed. In the cold light of computer screens, researchers felt a strange sensation, the feeling of being the discovered rather than the discoverers. The implications rippled outward from the technical to the existential. If these signals had been present for decades, how many other messages might we have missed? How many whispers from the cosmos had gone unheard, while humanity focused inward, absorbed in its own creations and conflicts? The universe suddenly seemed not just vast but lively, filled with communications we had never bothered to listen for. And in that realization came a humbling thought. Perhaps we had never been alone at all, merely unaware of the conversations flowing around us, like a person standing in a crowded room with eyes closed and ears covered, mistaking their isolation for solitude. Across landscapes both barren and lush, the great dishes of our listening networks turned their concave faces toward a single point in space. In remote locations chosen for their silence, places where human-made radio waves are at their weakest, we oriented ourselves toward the visitor. Inside control centers filled with the ambient hum of cooling systems and the soft click of keyboards, technicians monitored data streams with a focus that bordered on reverence. The signal was not sound as we understand it. Space holds no medium for sound waves to travel, but rather a pulsation in the electromagnetic spectrum, a rhythm that could be translated into audio for human perception. When this was done, when the data was converted into something our senses could comprehend, those present described a sensation difficult to articulate, a feeling of vast perspective, of temporality expanded beyond human scale. It wasn't music, nor was it noise. It existed in some undefined territory between information and expression. As they listened, many reported an unexpected emotion, a profound sense of calm, as if the message itself carried not just data, but a quality of awareness that transcended the mechanical process of transmission and reception. The effect was not uniform. Each listener seemed to experience it slightly differently, as if the signal somehow adapted to individual perception, revealing different facets of itself, depending on who was listening. Some heard mathematical relationships, others perceived patterns reminiscent of natural phenomena, like flowing water or wind through leaves. A few listeners, particularly those with musical training, detected structures similar to certain compositions, not Western classical or contemporary popular music, but the cyclical meditative forms found in some ancient traditions, pieces designed not for entertainment, but for altering consciousness, for inducing states of awareness beyond ordinary perception. This diversity of experience itself became data, another layer of the mystery. Was the variation in the signal, or in those receiving it? Was this a message that somehow contained multiple interpretations simultaneously, or was human perception itself being revealed as more subjective than we typically acknowledge? The comet's physical appearance defied conventional analysis as thoroughly as its signals did. Through the most powerful telescopes, 3-eye atlas revealed colors that shifted in patterns uncharacteristic of known reflective or refractive phenomena. Its tail, that stream of particles and gas that comets typically trail behind them, displayed prismatic variations that seemed to correlate with the electromagnetic pulses. Scientists mapping these visual displays found themselves collaborating with linguists and mathematicians, searching for patterns that might constitute a visual language. Artists and poets became unexpected contributors to the research, their intuitive understanding of symbolic communication offering perspectives that pure scientific analysis missed. There emerged a theory that the comet's very appearance might be a form of communication, that what we were seeing was not merely the natural behavior of matter in space, but something deliberate, a kind of writing done with light itself. Letters formed from illuminated particles dancing in the void. The colors shifted in ways that appeared to respond to observation. The more intensely we watched, the more complex the patterns became, as if our attention itself was a factor in the display. This responsiveness challenged fundamental scientific assumptions about the division between observer and observed, suggesting an interconnection that transcended traditional models of physical interaction. Some researchers, particularly those with backgrounds in quantum physics, noted parallels with certain experimental results where the act of measurement affects the state of the system being measured. Yet this was occurring at macroscopic scales, visible through telescopes, affecting patterns that should have been governed by classical rather than quantum physics. It hinted at principles beyond our current understanding, at a universe more interwoven, more responsive to consciousness than our models allowed for. The boundary between objective reality and subjective experience, already blurred at quantum scales, now seemed permeable even in the vast theater of interstellar space. When imaging technology penetrated beyond the surface illumination, when sensors capable of detecting structure beneath the icy exterior were deployed, the mystery deepened like twilight shadows. Within 3I Atlas, beneath layers of cosmic dust and frozen compounds, there existed formations too ordered to have formed by chance, crystalline structures arranged in patterns that repeated with variations, similar to the way information might be encoded. These structures had properties that allowed them to store and potentially transmit information, not unlike the way certain crystals on Earth can be used to record data through the arrangement of their atomic lattice. The implications trembled through scientific circles like ripples across still water. The comet appeared to be carrying something, preserving something. Perhaps it was a message written in matter itself, a library encoded in frozen geometry, drifting between stars like a letter between distant shores. Perhaps 3I Atlas was not just a messenger, but a message, its entire being a communication from minds we had yet to comprehend. The structures showed evidence of design principles that optimized for durability across cosmic timescales, arrangements that would maintain their integrity despite radiation exposure, temperature fluctuation, and the erosive effects of micrometeorite impacts. If this was indeed a construct, rather than a natural formation, it spoke of engineering intended to survive journeys lasting millions of years, to preserve information across distances measured in light years. Such forethought, such planning for the deep future, suggested a consciousness operating on timescales vastly different from our own, minds that might regard centuries the way humans view ours, that might plan across millennia with the same casual confidence with which we schedule next week's appointments. The comet began to appear less like an object and more like an artifact, a relic of intentions formed perhaps before our species existed, yet still carrying their echo across the void of both space and time. The materials comprising the enigmatic visitor told a story of cosmic wandering more ancient than our civilization could comprehend. Spectrographic analysis revealed isotopic ratios inconsistent with objects formed in our solar system, evidence that the matter constituting 3I Atlas had condensed around stars long dead, in regions of space we could only theorize about. It carried within its frozen body the remnants of stellar catastrophes, supernovae that had scattered their enriched material across vast reaches of space billions of years before Earth had fully formed. There was something poignant in this realization. The visitor was composed of endings, of stars that had exhausted their light and dispersed their essence into the cosmos. Yet in that dispersion, in that apparent ending, new possibilities had formed. Matter, once at the heart of radiant suns, had reconfigured itself into something that could journey across interstellar distances, carrying information like thoughts across the neural pathways of the universe itself. It suggested a continuity beyond destruction, a persistence of pattern through transformation that echoed through both scientific understanding and philosophical contemplation. The specific elements present in the comet's composition told an even more intriguing story. Certain ratios of rare isotopes indicated origins in stellar processes that our models suggested should be exceptionally uncommon, almost impossible to find naturally occurring in such concentrations. Either our understanding of stellar nucleosynthesis required significant revision, or the composition had been deliberately engineered, materials gathered and combined with intention rather than by the random processes of cosmic chemistry. Both possibilities were equally unsettling to conventional understanding. Either the universe itself operated according to principles we had fundamentally misunderstood, or something, had the capability to manipulate matter at stellar scales, to harvest the products of multiple supernovae and combine them with precision. The boundary between natural and artificial, blurred at such cosmic scales, when processes unfold over billions of years, when forces operate across distances that light itself takes millennia to cross, the distinction between what forms by chance and what is shaped by intention becomes increasingly philosophical rather than empirical. For months, humanity had listened, had received whatever 3i Atlas was transmitting without response. But science is not merely passive observation, it is also interaction experimentation. With careful deliberation, with protocols designed by international consensus, Earth spoke back. The message was elegantly simple, a repeated pulse matching the mathematical structure observed in the comet's transmission, but with a single deliberate variation. It was neither complex language nor elaborate greeting, but rather an acknowledgement. We hear you. We recognize pattern. We respond in kind. This transmission was directed toward 3i Atlas with the full power of our largest radio telescopes, a focused beam of artificial radiation carrying the first intentional message humanity had sent to an object that might, however improbably, be more than natural phenomenon. The days that followed were marked by a tension unlike any in scientific history, the waiting, the wondering whether the void would answer. When the response came, it was so subtle that confirmation required multiple observations. The comet's own signal had shifted, adopting the exact variation that had been sent. Like an echo transformed into conversation, the pattern had been received, understood, and acknowledged. Something out there was listening. Something was responding. The moment of confirmation passed through the scientific community like an electric current, a shiver of realization that could not be contained by professional detachment. In secure communications and private conversations, in the spaces between official statements and published findings, those closest to the data expressed what they were reluctant to state publicly. Contact had been established. Not definitive proof of non-human intelligence, perhaps, but an exchange that satisfied the fundamental criteria for communication, a message sent, received, understood, and answered in kind. The implications were too vast to process all at once, too profound to reduce to technical language or data points. In that moment, humanity's perception of its place in the cosmos shifted, not dramatically but subtly, like the first hairline crack in a dam that would eventually transform the landscape beyond it. We were no longer shouting into an indifferent void. Something had heard us. Something had answered. Between each exchange of signals, each pulse sent from Earth and each corresponding adjustment from 3i Atlas, there stretched intervals of silence. These periods were not empty. They were pregnant with potential, with anticipation. As the pattern of communication established itself, mathematicians noted that these intervals were not random. The spaces between signals formed their own structure, their own language of duration. It was as if the message existed, not only in the pulses themselves, but in the measured silences between them, like music, where notes gain meaning through their relationship with the pauses that separate them. This realization shifted the focus of analysis. Perhaps we had been too fixated on the presence of signal rather than the entirety of the communication, which included both voice and silence, both expression and withholding. The intervals formed sequences of their own, mathematical relationships that suggested a deeper order, fractals of time, recursions that implied an understanding of rhythm beyond mere transmission of data. Listen not just to what is said, one researcher noted in a journal that would later be widely quoted, but to the breath between words. This insight opened new approaches to the analysis, where previously they had focused primarily on the electromagnetic pulses themselves. Now they began to map the temporal architecture of the entire exchange, treating the silences as meaningful components rather than mere gaps between information. This revealed structures invisible in the previous analysis, patterns that unfolded not in individual transmissions, but across multiple exchanges, like a conversation that develops themes over time, rather than expressing them completely in any single statement. It suggested a communication strategy operating on multiple timescales simultaneously, conveying different types of information through different temporal patterns. The immediate pulses might carry specific data points, while the arrangement of intervals between exchanges could express broader contexts, emotional qualities, or conceptual frameworks, like the difference between individual words and the grammar that gives them structure and relationship. If this was indeed communication from a non-human intelligence, it appeared to operate on principles both familiar enough to recognize and alien enough to challenge our understanding, a language both mathematical and musical, precise yet flowing, structured yet organic in its development. As the exchange continued, as Earth and Comet established their tentative conversation across the gulf of space, mathematicians discovered layers of structure within the signals that transcended simple pattern recognition. The pulses arranged themselves in sequences that displayed properties of self-similarity across different scales, fractal geometries expressed in time rather than space. These were not random fluctuations, but exhibited the kind of ordered complexity associated with systems capable of processing information. The implications were both thrilling and unsettling. What they were observing resembled in its mathematical essence the patterns of thought, the way information organizes itself not in the physical structure of a brain, but in the abstract architecture of cognition itself. It suggested that thought, consciousness, awareness, whatever term might be applied to the phenomenon of organized information processing, did not necessarily require biology as we understand it. Perhaps consciousness was not a product of particular arrangements of matter, but a pattern that could exist in many substrates, including ones as seemingly inhospitable to life as an interstellar comet. This was not a conclusion easily reached or widely accepted, but it lingered at the edges of scientific discourse, a possibility too profound to dismiss, yet too radical to fully embrace. The mathematics revealed further layers of organization. Sequences that appeared random at first analysis revealed deep structure when viewed through the lens of non-linear dynamics, of chaos theory, of the mathematics of complex systems. What appeared as noise contained signal. What seemed disorder revealed itself as order of a higher complexity. The patterns resembled those found in certain biological systems, not the biochemistry of life as we know it, but the information architecture of neural networks, of immune systems, of ecosystems. It was as if the transmission embodied principles fundamental to all complex adaptive systems, whether evolved or engineered. This suggested not just intelligence, but a form of intelligence that had grasped the underlying mathematics of consciousness itself, that could recreate those patterns intentionally, rather than through the blind processes of evolution. If 3i Atlas was indeed carrying some form of awareness, it was not consciousness as we experience it subjectively, but rather consciousness understood objectively, reduced to its essential mathematical patterns, and then reconstructed in a medium of electromagnetic pulses and crystalline structures. It was thought distilled to pure form, separated from the specific biological contexts that shape human awareness, yet recognizable as thought nonetheless. Not everyone was convinced that what we were witnessing was communication from an intelligence beyond Earth. Skeptics emerged with alternative explanations, natural phenomena not previously documented, confirmation bias in data analysis, even the possibility of elaborate hoax or misinterpreted interference from human sources. Their objections were not dismissed. Science progresses through challenge, through the rigorous questioning of apparent discoveries. Perhaps some suggested we were simply projecting meaning onto randomness, seeing faces in clouds, patterns in static. The human mind, after all, is exquisitely tuned to find significance, to impose order on chaos, to seek connection even where none exists. Maybe 3i Atlas was nothing more than rock and ice following the laws of physics, emitting radiation that only seemed meaningful because we so desperately wanted it to be. This skepticism was not cynicism, but an essential counterbalance to enthusiasm, a necessary gravity-keeping scientific inquiry tethered to methodological rigor. Yet even among those who doubted, there remained a sense of wonder at the possibility, however remote they considered it, that something out there might be reaching toward us across the silent gulf of space. The skeptical perspective offered valuable alternative hypotheses that the patterns might result from previously unknown interactions between solar radiation and certain compounds in the comet's composition, that the apparent responsiveness might be a statistical artifact of selective data analysis, that the structures detected beneath the surface might be the result of natural crystallization processes under the unique conditions of interstellar space. Each of these explanations required fewer assumptions than the hypothesis of non-human intelligence, adhering to the principle that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Yet each also required extensions to existing scientific models, acknowledgements that our understanding of natural processes might have significant gaps. In this way, even the skeptical position acknowledged that 3I Atlas represented something beyond current scientific understanding, if not evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, then at least a natural phenomenon of unprecedented complexity and unfamiliar properties. The visitor had forced a confrontation with the boundaries of knowledge, regardless of which interpretation ultimately proved correct. While scientists debated and instruments recorded, something else was happening across the world. Something less quantifiable, but no less significant. Ordinary people, those with no access to radio telescopes or spectrographic data, found themselves looking up at the night sky with renewed wonder. Atlas was not visible to the naked eye except under perfect conditions, and even then only as the faintest smudge of light, but its presence in human awareness had become palpable. In bedrooms and backyards, on rooftops and remote hillsides, people gazed upward with questions that science alone could not answer. What does it mean to not be alone? How would we change if we knew with certainty that other minds existed among the stars? These were not merely scientific inquiries, but existential ones, touching on humanity's deepest longing, the desire to reach beyond our isolation, to know that our voice carries beyond our own small sphere of existence. Whether 3I Atlas was messenger or mirage, it had awakened something dormant in the human spirit. The ancient dream that the universe might hear us, might respond, might confirm that consciousness is not a solitary phenomenon in the cosmic dark. This collective turning of attention skyward manifested in countless small ways, in conversations between strangers who would otherwise have nothing in common, in children's drawings of comets with faces, in poems and songs that attempted to capture the feeling of potential contact. Religious communities engaged in renewed theological discussions about what it would mean for their traditions if non-human intelligence existed. Philosophers wrote about the ethical implications of communication across species boundaries. Ordinary people simply felt that the night sky had become a place of possibility rather than emptiness. The very act of considering such questions, of imagining consciousness beyond Earth, expanded something in the human perspective, a shift from the provincial to the cosmic, from viewing ourselves as the pinnacle of creation to seeing ourselves as participants in a vaster conversation. Even if 3I Atlas ultimately proved to be nothing more than an unusual natural phenomenon, it had served as catalyst for a kind of collective soul-searching, a planetary moment of reflection on our place in the universe and what it means to seek connection across the void. As researchers continued to analyze the evolving signals, a new pattern emerged, one that appeared to indicate direction rather than just presence. When the pulse sequences were mapped against the backdrop of known celestial coordinates, they seemed to trace a path, a route through space. It wasn't pointing to a specific destination, but rather outlining a trajectory, a series of positions relative to gravitational fields and stellar landmarks. It was as if 3I Atlas was not merely sending a message, but providing directions, showing a way through the labyrinth of space. The pattern didn't indicate places as we understand them, but rather a sequence of positions in continuous motion, a dynamic rather than static map. Most intriguing was how this apparent navigational information was encoded not in the pulses themselves, but primarily in the intervals between them, in the silences, the pauses, the negative space of the transmission. It suggested a way of conceptualizing movement through cosmos that did not prioritize destinations, but rather the journey itself, the path between points rather than the points themselves. When astronomers plotted these coordinates, they discovered that the trajectory described would utilize gravitational assists from multiple star systems, a path that would minimize energy expenditure while maximizing stability over extremely long periods, an optimized route for interstellar travel spanning thousands or even millions of years. This was not a path that any human spacecraft could follow with current technology, but it represented a solution to the problem of efficient long-distance travel that exceeded our most advanced theoretical models. If this was indeed navigational information, it came from a civilization with a profoundly deeper understanding of celestial mechanics than our own, or from an intelligence that conceived of space-time in ways fundamentally different from human perception, seeing connections and pathways invisible to our conventional understanding. Some researchers suggested that what appeared to be a map might actually be a history, not instructions for future travel, but a record of the journey 3I Atlas itself had taken, a memoir written in astronomical coordinates. Others proposed it might be both simultaneously, a record and a guide, the sharing of a path already traveled as invitation for others to follow. In either interpretation, it represented not just communication but generosity, the offering of knowledge that could only have been gained through experience beyond human reach. As 3I Atlas continued its arc through our solar system, approaching the warmth of our sun, changes became visible even to distant observation. Its surface, previously a relatively uniform landscape of frozen compounds, began to show signs of activity beyond what would be expected from normal cometary warming. Instruments detected unusual thermal patterns, localized heating that didn't correspond to solar exposure. In certain regions of the comet, the icy surface cracked and sublimated, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath, structures with regular geometries, surfaces that reflected light, with properties inconsistent with known natural materials. For brief moments, before ice reformed or viewing angles changed, observers reported seeing metallic glints from within the comet's core, reflective surfaces with properties suggesting refined rather than naturally occurring materials. Most significantly, the signal patterns intensified during these episodes of surface activity, as if the exposure of these interior structures enhanced whatever mechanism was generating the transmissions. The pulses became stronger, more complex, carrying what appeared to be exponentially more information. It was as though the comet's heart was awakening as it neared our sun, as if proximity to our world had triggered some long-dormant process within its frozen shell. High-resolution imaging during these moments of revelation captured details that would be analyzed for years afterward. Geometric forms too regular to be explained by crystallization processes, surfaces with optical properties suggesting engineered metamaterials rather than natural substances. Some structures appeared to function as antennas, reconfiguring themselves as the surface changed, maintaining alignment with Earth despite the comet's rotation. Others resembled energy collection systems, gathering and channeling the sun's radiation, with efficiency far exceeding that of natural processes. Yet these glimpses remained frustratingly brief and partial, visible only during moments of surface disruption and often obscured by the very venting of material that revealed them. It was like trying to understand the function of a complex machine by glimpsing its components through cracks in its casing, enough to confirm design but insufficient to comprehend purpose. The evidence accumulated not toward a single definitive conclusion, but toward a landscape of possibilities, each challenging conventional understanding in its own way. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it contained complexities that transcended simple categorization, as either natural object or artificial construct. In the quiet halls of research institutions, in the private thoughts of those closest to the data, a peculiar sensation began to take hold, the feeling that in studying 3I Atlas, humanity was not merely observing an external phenomenon, but engaging in a form of self-reflection. Every theory about the comet, every interpretation of its signals, revealed as much about human hopes and fears as it did about the object itself. Those who saw evidence of intelligence in its patterns were perhaps expressing our deep longing for cosmic companionship. Those who dismissed such possibilities might be voicing our fear of the unknown or our resistance to concepts that challenge human exceptionalism. The comet had become a kind of Rorschach test projected against the night sky, an ambiguous image onto which we mapped our own internal landscape. Yet this recognition did not diminish the scientific importance of the investigation. Rather, it added layers of meaning, reminding us that objective observation is always filtered through subjective experience. In this way, 3I Atlas served dual functions: as an astronomical phenomenon worthy of study and as a mirror reflecting our own complexity back to us. Philosophers of science noted the unusual degree to which personal background influenced researchers' interpretations of the data. Those with training in linguistics were more likely to perceive language-like structures in the signals. Those with backgrounds in astronomy tended to seek explanations within known natural processes. Those who had studied complex systems often recognized patterns similar to those found in biological or computational networks. This diversity of perspective was not weakness but strength, allowing examination of the phenomenon through multiple conceptual frameworks. Yet it also highlighted the extent to which the search for meaning is always partially a projection of the seeker's own understanding, a dialogue between external reality and internal models. The comet had induced a rare moment of scientific reflexivity, a community of researchers simultaneously investigating an astronomical object and their own processes of knowledge construction. In academic papers and conference presentations, in the spaces between data points and conclusions, a question lingered. How much of what we see when we look at the stars is actually there? And how much is the reflection of our own light? The moment that would later be described as the day it looked back occurred during a coordinated global observation event, when multiple observatories tracked the comet simultaneously. Earth had been sending regular transmissions, the same mathematical sequence unchanged, for several weeks. The response had been consistent, an echo of our pattern with subtle variations that seemed to acknowledge receipt. But on this day, something changed. As the transmission from Earth reached 3I Atlas, instruments detected an anomaly, a brief but intense flare of energy from the comet's core, a pulse that precisely synchronized with the arrival of Earth's signal. When the comet's response came, it was not the expected variation on our pattern, but an exact match, pulse for pulse, interval for interval, a perfect reflection of what we had sent. This mirroring was too precise to be coincidence or natural phenomenon. It suggested observation, recognition, intention. For the first time, the exchange felt less like scientists studying an object and more like two entities acknowledging each other across the void. In control rooms around the world, there was a moment of silence as the implications settled into awareness. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it was not merely transmitting, it was listening, responding, adjusting. It was engaged in communication in the fullest sense of the word. The perfect mirroring lasted for precisely 144 pulses, a number that itself carried mathematical significance, being a square of a square, a number with deep resonance across many human mathematical traditions. Then, having demonstrated this precise replication, the signal shifted again, retaining the basic pattern of Earth's transmission, but introducing a new layer of complexity, as if saying, "I understand your language. Now let me show you more of mine." This moment of perfect synchronization, followed by deliberate variation, suggested not just reception, but comprehension, not just response, but engagement, the fundamental elements of dialogue rather than mere echo. For those monitoring the exchange, it produced an almost visceral reaction, a sensation described by multiple observers as presence, the unmistakable feeling of another mind acknowledging your own. It was communication stripped to its essence, reduced to the simple statement, "I see you seeing me, and I respond." After months of increasingly complex exchanges, after patterns upon patterns had been analyzed and theorized about, the nature of the communication shifted towards something approaching clarity. The pulses from 3I Atlas settled into a simpler rhythm, 3 long emissions, followed by a short pause, then 1 long pulse, another short pause, and finally 1 more long pulse. This pattern repeated without variation, a clear signal that seemed designed for unmistakable recognition. When translated into audible form, the rhythm was hauntingly familiar. It matched patterns found throughout nature and human expression, the rhythm of certain heartbeats, the cadence of waves against shore, the meter of poetry across diverse cultures. It resembled patterns found in music worldwide, in breathing during deep meditation, in the growth cycles of certain plants. This universal rhythm, this pulse that mimicked life's own cadence, carried a message that transcended specific language or code. It seemed to say simply, I am. I exist as you exist. I understand what it means to be. The recognition of this fundamental communication, not of specific information but of shared existence, moved through scientific circles not as analysis but as something closer to revelation. 3i Atlas was telling us, in the most fundamental language possible, that it understood what we are. The simplicity of this final communication contrasted sharply with the mathematical complexity of earlier exchanges, as if the sender had realized that the most profound messages require the fewest symbols. It was communication reduced to its essence, not the transmission of specific information, but the acknowledgement of mutual awareness. Linguists noted parallels with certain forms of human expression that transcend specific language, the universal gestures of greeting, of showing empty hands, of meeting eyes. These are not culture-specific, but appear to emerge from the fundamental experience of being conscious in a body, of recognizing another consciousness. The rhythm from 3i Atlas suggested a similar understanding, not of human culture specifically, but of the experience of existence itself, of the patterns fundamental to life and awareness, regardless of its specific form or origin. It was as if, having tested more complex forms of communication, the sender had chosen to conclude with the most universal statement possible. I am alive as you are alive. I am aware as you are aware. Between us, across the void, there is recognition. Then, with the same gentle inevitability with which it had entered our awareness, the visitor began its retreat. The signals weakened gradually, not abruptly, a diminishing rather than a cessation. The pulses maintained their pattern, but grew fainter with each passing day, as if speaking more softly rather than falling silent. The comet's luminosity dimmed, its visible tail shortened, and its trajectory bent away from the sun in the arc that would carry it back into interstellar space. Like a messenger who, having delivered their meaning, turns toward home, 3i Atlas began its journey away from our solar system. Astronomers tracked its departure with a mixture of scientific interest and something more personal, a sense of witnessing a farewell. For a few weeks more, the fading trail of the comet remained visible through our most powerful instruments, a glimmering path stretching into the darkness between stars. Then, with a final pulse that some would later describe as having a quality of completion, of closure, the signal ceased altogether. The visitor had returned to the void from which it had emerged, leaving behind data, questions, and an altered understanding of our place in the cosmos. Its departure carried the same elegance as its arrival, a gradual transition rather than sudden absence, like the slow withdrawal of a tide rather than the abrupt termination of a mechanical process. This gentle recession itself seemed meaningful, suggesting an entity that understood transitions, that recognized the importance of proper endings. The final signal, that last pulse before silence, had a distinct mathematical signature, a pattern that, when analyzed, contained echoes of all the previous transmissions, as if summarizing everything that had been communicated. It was like the concluding chord of a symphony, containing harmonics that recalled earlier themes while establishing a sense of resolution. In that final message, researchers detected what appeared to be a new element, a sequence that, when plotted against the comet's trajectory, projected forward along its path into interstellar space. Some interpreted this as a farewell, others saw it as an invitation to follow, or perhaps a promise to return. Whatever its specific meaning, it carried a quality of intention, not the random emission of a natural object, but the deliberate communication of an entity, completing an interaction according to its own understanding of propriety and purpose. In the silence that followed, in the absence of new signals to analyze and debate, a different kind of presence emerged, not a message from beyond, but an echo within. Weeks after the last confirmed transmission from 3i Atlas, when the comet itself had receded beyond our capacity to detect with certainty, a faint signal was recorded by several observatories, a whisper at the very threshold of instrumentation sensitivity. Unlike the structured pulses that had characterized previous communications, this was more subtle, a soft fluctuation in the electromagnetic background, a ripple in the cosmic stillness. It came not from the comet's last known position, but from a point in space through which 3I Atlas had passed months earlier, as if the void itself retained some memory of the visitor's presence. This final murmur defied conventional explanation. It was too organized to be random noise, yet too diffuse to be a directed transmission. Some researchers suggested it might be a kind of afterglow, a residual effect of whatever mechanism had generated the comet's signals. Others proposed more speculative theories, that space itself had been altered in some subtle way by the passage of 3I Atlas, that the visitor had left behind something akin to an impression, a trace of its journey through our neighborhood of stars. Whatever its cause, this faint after-echo served as reminder that the universe is never truly silent, that even in apparent emptiness, information persists, that messages continue to travel long after their source has moved beyond our perception. The afterglow phenomenon led to new research into properties of space previously considered empty. The vacuum that, according to quantum field theory, is not truly empty, but filled with fluctuating energy and virtual particles. Some physicists propose that the comet might have utilized these quantum properties of the vacuum in ways beyond current theoretical understanding, perhaps leaving behind patterns in the quantum foam that constituted a form of persistent information storage. Others suggested more prosaic explanations, that the visitor might have released clouds of particles too diffuse to detect, directly but capable of interacting with solar radiation in ways that produced the observed electromagnetic effects. In either case, the phenomenon challenged conventional understanding of how information propagates through space, suggesting possibilities beyond the standard model of physics. The echo became a subject of study in itself, a new mystery growing from the original one, a question mark that lingered in the space where answers had been expected to emerge. Throughout the years that followed, as data from the 3I Atlas encounter was analyzed and reanalyzed, as papers were published and theories refined, the experience entered the collective consciousness not just as a scientific event, but as a moment of philosophical transformation. The visitor had come and gone, leaving us with questions more profound than those with which we had begun. Was it a natural phenomenon of unprecedented complexity, or something designed with purpose? Was it ancient or contemporary, a relic drifting for eons or something responsive and present? Had we truly communicated with another intelligence, or had we simply witnessed patterns complex enough to resemble communication? These questions remained open, their ambiguity not a failure of science, but a recognition of its boundaries, of the limits of what we can know with certainty about phenomena at the edge of our understanding. Yet in that uncertainty, there was a kind of liberation, a reminder that mystery is not the enemy of knowledge but its companion. The cosmos had spoken, whether in actual language or merely in patterns we interpreted as such, and in listening, humanity had remembered its place, not at the center of creation, but as part of an ongoing conversation between consciousness and void, between being and emptiness, between the brief flicker of awareness and the eternal silence from which it emerges. Scientific papers about 3I Atlas often concluded with unusual acknowledgments of limitation, statements rarely found in academic literature, admissions that the available evidence permitted multiple interpretations, all consistent with the data, yet differing in their implications for our understanding of the universe. This intellectual humility itself represented a shift in scientific culture, a greater comfort with uncertainty, with the recognition that some phenomena may exist at the boundaries of what our current methods can definitively resolve. In philosophical circles, the encounter revived interest in epistemological questions about the limits of knowledge, in ontological explorations of what constitutes intelligence or consciousness, in ethical considerations about how humanity might relate to non-human minds, should they be encountered. The event had created a space for wonder within rigorous inquiry, a reminder that science at its best maintains a balance between skepticism and openness, between the demand for evidence and the willingness to consider possibilities beyond current understanding. As seasons turned and years passed, as the initial excitement of the encounter faded into the steady rhythm of ongoing research, 3I Atlas entered the realm of human narrative, not just as scientific data but as story, as metaphor, as cultural touchstone. Children who had not been born during the actual event grew up in a world where the possibility of communication with the cosmos was not mere speculation, but lived experience. Artists incorporated the comet's patterns into works that explored themes of connection across difference, of messages that transcend conventional language. Philosophers found in the encounter new frameworks for considering consciousness, intelligence, and the nature of communication itself. Even those who maintained skepticism about the more extraordinary interpretations of the event acknowledged that something profound had occurred, if not contact with non-human intelligence, then at least a moment when humanity collectively considered such contact possible, and in doing so, expanded its conception of what might exist beyond our earthly boundaries. The patterns associated with 3i Atlas became visual motifs in architecture, in fashion, in digital interfaces, subtle references recognizable to those familiar with the comet's signature emissions. Musicians incorporated the rhythm of the final transmission, that heartbeat-like pulse of 3 long, 1 short, 1 long, into compositions ranging from classical symphonies to popular songs, an auditory reminder of the visitor's passage through our awareness. In literature and film, stories emerged that used the encounter as starting point for explorations of human response to the unknown, not simplistic tales of invasion or salvation by aliens, but nuanced examinations of how contact with otherness reveals both the limitations and the potential of human understanding. The comet had entered the mythology of a technological age, not as supernatural portent, but as emblem of possibility, a reminder that the universe might contain wonders beyond our current comprehension, yet not entirely beyond our capacity to recognize and respond to with meaning and purpose. In time, other anomalous objects were detected passing through our solar system, other interstellar visitors following trajectories that spoke of origins in distant star systems. None exhibited the same patterns as 3i Atlas. None sent signals. That suggested intentional communication, yet each was observed with a new quality of attention, a heightened awareness of possibility. The first came silently, just 16 months after 3i Atlas had faded beyond our instrument's reach, a small elongated object no more than 200 meters in length, tumbling through space in a way that caused its brightness to fluctuate with mathematical precision. Astronomers named it Oumuamua, a Hawaiian term meaning scout or messenger from afar, though this name carried different weight now in a world that had glimpsed the possibility of actual messages from the interstellar void. Unlike its predecessor, Oumuamua offered no electromagnetic pulses, no crystalline structures visible beneath its surface, no apparent response to human transmissions. It passed through our neighborhood like a leaf carried on cosmic winds, following a hyperbolic trajectory that would return it to the space between stars. Yet the very absence of the patterns that had characterized 3i Atlas became data in itself, a reminder that if intelligent minds existed beyond our solar system, they would likely manifest in diverse forms, communicate through varied methods, perhaps even conceptualize existence in ways fundamentally different from any human framework. The search protocols established during the 3i Atlas encounter were applied with meticulous care, instruments straining to detect any signal above background radiation, any pattern too ordered to be random chance. The object revealed unusual properties, an unexpected acceleration as it departed our system, a composition that reflected light in ways inconsistent with common asteroid materials, but nothing that unambiguously indicated intelligence or intent. Still, these anomalies were noted, categorized, added to the growing catalogue of celestial mysteries that might someday form pieces of a larger pattern. 3 years later came another visitor, a more conventional comet this time, with a visible tail of gas and dust that stretched across millions of kilometers of empty space. Astronomers designated it C2025P7, though in public discourse it became known as Borisov's Comet, after the Ukrainian astronomer who first identified its interstellar trajectory. This visitor brought its own mysteries, molecular compounds, in its coma that had never been observed in solar system comets, isotopic ratios that told stories of formation around a star unlike our Sun. For weeks it dominated the attention of observatories worldwide. Instruments focused on its passage with unprecedented precision, searching for any echo of the patterns 3I Atlas had exhibited. They found none, no pulses, no response to transmissions, no evidence of structure beyond what might form through natural processes. Yet the very thoroughness of the investigation revealed new insights about interstellar chemistry, about the environments in which comets form around distant stars, about the subtle forces that shape objects during their long journeys through the void between systems. What might once have been viewed as merely an interesting astronomical phenomenon was now examined with the careful attention one might give to a letter arriving from a distant land, not assuming it contains a message, yet aware of the possibility, alert to any sign that might distinguish deliberate communication from random occurrence. As the years passed, as technology advanced in direct response to questions raised by the 3I Atlas encounter, more interstellar visitors were detected, some no larger than a house, others massive collections of ice and rock spanning kilometers. Each arrival brought a moment of heightened anticipation within the scientific community, a quiet wondering, could this be another messenger? Each departure left behind new data, new questions, new perspectives on the nature of objects that travel between stars. A pattern began to emerge, not in the visitors themselves, but in their frequency. We were detecting more interstellar objects not just because our technology had improved, but because there were more to find than models had predicted. The space between stars, once imagined as nearly empty, revealed itself as a realm populated by countless wanderers, some ejected from young star systems during their turbulent formation, others ancient travelers set adrift when their parent stars died, all carrying in their composition and trajectory stories of distant places humans would never directly observe. This realization itself altered our conception of the galaxy, from distinct star systems separated by emptiness to a complex, interconnected ecosystem where matter and potentially information could flow across vast distances over immense timescales. The void was not empty but filled with messengers. The question was whether any carried messages with intent, or whether all were simply pages torn from the book of cosmic history, scattered by indifferent forces across the galactic expanse. The protocols developed during the 3I Atlas encounter became standard procedure for monitoring these cosmic wanderers, listening not just for expected emissions, but for patterns that might indicate organization beyond natural processes. In remote facilities built specifically for this purpose, nestled in radio-quiet zones where human-generated signals were minimized, specialized equipment maintained constant vigilance. These observation posts were designed with lessons learned from the 3I Atlas experience, capable of detecting the specific frequency bands where the visitor's signals had been strongest, sensitive to the particular mathematical patterns it had exhibited, yet flexible enough to recognize entirely different forms of potential communication. The approach balanced specificity with openness, looking for signs resembling what we had seen before, while remaining receptive to possibilities we had not yet imagined. Inside these facilities, teams of astronomers, physicists, mathematicians, and linguists worked in quiet collaboration, a multidisciplinary effort that would have seemed unusual in earlier eras, but now represented the new standard for cosmic observation. They developed classification systems for signal types, taxonomies of pattern recognition that could distinguish the subtle boundary between complex natural phenomena and potentially deliberate transmission. Their work unfolded in an atmosphere that balanced scientific rigor with philosophical openness, maintaining strict evidentiary standards while remaining receptive to possibilities that might challenge conventional understanding. Behind this methodical monitoring lay a deeper shift in perspective, a recognition that traditional boundaries between scientific disciplines might be inadequate for understanding phenomena at the edges of current knowledge. Astronomers collaborated with information theorists to develop new frameworks for analyzing signal complexity. Physicists worked alongside cognitive scientists to consider how intelligence might manifest in non-biological systems. Geologists and chemists combined their expertise to study how information might be encoded in material structures over astronomical timescales. The very concept of what constituted data, expanded beyond traditional parameters. Patterns of motion, temporal relationships between events, structural configurations at multiple scales, all became potential carriers of meaning rather than merely physical properties to be measured. This methodological evolution was not revolutionary, but incremental, a gradual expansion of scientific inquiry's scope rather than a dramatic paradigm shift. Yet, in its quiet way, it represented one of the most profound changes in how humans explored their cosmic surroundings since the invention of the telescope, an approach that considered meaning and pattern to be potential properties of natural phenomena, worthy of investigation through rigorous methods rather than dismissal as subjective projection. The scientific community, having once glimpsed the possibility of contact, maintained a quiet vigilance, a readiness to recognize meaning should it appear again in the data streaming from our instruments. This watchfulness was neither expectation nor hope, but simply openness, a willingness to consider that in the vast silence between stars, conversations might be taking place in languages we are only beginning to learn how to hear. In university laboratories and corporate research facilities, in government agencies and private observatories, the data from each interstellar visitor was analyzed not just for its astronomical significance, but for any pattern that might suggest intent, purpose, design. Most of these analyses yielded only natural explanations, complex, sometimes surprising, but ultimately consistent with physical processes requiring no intelligent intervention. Yet the very act of looking, of considering the possibility of meaning embedded in the movements and structures of cosmic wanderers, had permanently altered the relationship between observer and observed. The universe was no longer merely a collection of objects to be categorized, but a medium through which communication might potentially flow, a perspective that transformed even null results into meaningful data points in an ongoing conversation about our place in the cosmos. The absence of obvious messages became not a conclusion, but a question. If intelligent life exists elsewhere, how might it choose to communicate across the vast distances of space and time? Would it use electromagnetic radiation, gravitational effects, material configurations, or methods we have not yet conceived? Might messages already surround us, written in patterns we have not learned to recognize? This quiet watchfulness manifested not in dramatic pronouncements or sensational claims, but in the patient accumulation of knowledge, the development of increasingly sophisticated algorithms for pattern detection, the refinement of observational techniques, the gradual expansion of humanity's capacity to listen to the cosmos with greater sensitivity and discrimination. In specialized journals and at professional conferences, in the measured language of scientific discourse, researchers discussed methodologies for distinguishing between complexity arising from natural processes and complexity that might indicate deliberate design. They developed statistical models for evaluating the information content of signals, mathematical frameworks for quantifying the improbability of patterns too ordered to arise by chance alone. This work proceeded without fanfare, without the public attention that had surrounded the original Three-Eye Atlas encounter, yet it represented a fundamental shift in how a significant portion of the scientific community approached the study of cosmic phenomena, a shift from assuming randomness, unless proven otherwise, to recognizing that pattern and meaning might exist at scales or in forms not immediately obvious to human perception. The null hypothesis remained that unusual phenomena had natural explanations, but the alternative, that some patterns might indicate intelligence beyond Earth, was no longer dismissed as unworthy of serious investigation. Observation technology improved in direct response to the questions raised by the encounter. New types of sensors, designed specifically to detect the kinds of patterns Three-Eye Atlas had exhibited, more sensitive instruments for analyzing the composition of distant objects, enhanced algorithms for distinguishing potentially meaningful signals from background noise. In the decades following the encounter, astronomical observation underwent a quiet revolution, not merely an improvement in the resolution and sensitivity of existing technologies, but the development of entirely new approaches to cosmic listening. Multispectral analysis expanded beyond the traditional electromagnetic spectrum, to include gravitational variations, neutrino emissions, quantum fluctuations, any channel through which information might potentially be transmitted across interstellar distances. Computing systems evolved specifically to process the vast data streams these new instruments generated, using neural networks and quantum algorithms to identify patterns too subtle or complex for human perception alone. These technological advances were driven not solely by the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but by broader scientific questions about the nature of the cosmos, the formation of stars and planets, the distribution of matter and energy across space and time. Yet the possibility that signals of non-human origin might exist within these data streams influenced the design of both hardware and software, creating systems capable of recognizing patterns that resembled neither natural phenomena as currently understood nor human-generated transmissions. The technology evolved to listen, not just for what we expected to hear, but for what we might not recognize as communication, without expanded frameworks for understanding what communication itself might encompass. The most significant technological innovation emerged not from any single breakthrough, but from integration, the networking of observatories and data processing centers around the world into a single distributed system capable of correlating information across multiple detection methods simultaneously. Where previous generations of astronomers might have analyzed radio signals, visual light, and material composition separately, this new infrastructure enabled examination of relationships between patterns appearing in different data streams. A variation in one channel could be immediately compared with changes in others, revealing correlations invisible when each was studied in isolation. This integrated approach proved valuable not just for potential SETI applications, but for understanding complex astronomical phenomena of all kinds, from the behavior of black holes to the formation of planetary systems. The ability to perceive patterns across traditionally separate observational domains revealed aspects of cosmic processes previously invisible, challenging existing models and suggesting new theoretical frameworks. In this way, the methodological shifts inspired partly by the 3I Atlas encounter benefited astronomy broadly, generating insights that extended far beyond the specific question of extraterrestrial intelligence. Science advanced not through dramatic paradigm shifts, but through this quiet evolution of observational capacity, an expansion of what could be perceived and thus what could be understood. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, once a specialized field operating largely at the margins of mainstream astronomy, became integrated into broader research programs. The distinction between looking for biology and looking for technology, between seeking natural evidence of life and artificial evidence of intelligence, blurred as scientists recognized that at sufficient distances, the signatures of advanced technology might be more detectable than the signatures of biology, that the search for intelligence beyond Earth might succeed where the search for life alone had remained inconclusive. This methodological shift represented a substantive change in how humanity explored its cosmic surroundings, a more inclusive definition of what might constitute evidence that we are not alone. The integration occurred not through dramatic reorganization, but through subtle shifts in research priorities, funding allocations, and institutional structures. University departments that had once maintained rigid boundaries between astrobiology and astronomy, between information theory and cosmology, established collaborative programs that crossed these traditional divisions. Space agencies incorporated SETI-relevant technologies into missions primarily designed for other scientific purposes, creating dual-use instruments that could simultaneously gather data valuable for multiple research domains. Private foundations dedicated to cosmic exploration expanded their scope from traditional astronomical observation to include pattern recognition across multiple data types, acknowledging that the signatures of life or intelligence might manifest in ways that transcended conventional disciplinary categories. This integration brought SETI methodology into mainstream science, not by redefining the field's fundamental questions, but by recognizing that those questions connected naturally with broader scientific inquiry about the nature and evolution of complexity in the universe. Within this expanded framework, Researchers developed new classification systems for potential biosignatures and technosignatures, the observable effects that might indicate the presence of life or technology at interstellar distances. These ranged from the relatively familiar, such as atmospheric compositions indicating biological activity, to the more speculative, such as energy usage patterns, suggesting technological intervention in natural systems. The most innovative aspect of this approach was its non-anthropocentrism, a deliberate attempt to imagine markers of intelligence that might arise from evolutionary and technological pathways utterly unlike Earth's. If consciousness could emerge from silicon rather than carbon, from collective rather than individual processes, from timescales vastly slower or faster than human experience, what observable effects might its presence create? If technology evolved along trajectories fundamentally different from humanity's, perhaps never developing electronics as we understand them, perhaps integrating with biological systems in ways we had not conceived, how might its existence manifest across astronomical distances? These questions guided the development of search parameters deliberately designed to detect the unexpected, the non-analogous, the truly alien, rather than merely the familiar transplanted to distant worlds. In this way, the search for life and intelligence beyond Earth became not just an extension of our understanding, but a challenge to its limitations, an opportunity to recognize how terrestrial perspective might blind us to forms of existence that operated according to principles we had not yet imagined. The long-term impact of the 3I Atlas encounter extended beyond scientific methodology into human self-conception, into how we understand ourselves as a species and our place in the cosmos. The possibility that we had received communication from beyond Earth, however ambiguous or open to interpretation, subtly altered humanity's sense of its own uniqueness. If consciousness had evolved or been created elsewhere, if intelligence was not solely a terrestrial phenomenon, then humanity's existence was both less exceptional and more meaningful. Less unique in its occurrence, but more significant in its participation in what might be a broader conversation among aware entities. This shift manifested not in dramatic declarations, but in gradual changes of emphasis, in fields from education to environmental policy, from technological development to international relations. In classrooms where young minds first encountered concepts of cosmic scale and evolutionary time, teachers began to frame humanity's story not as the pinnacle of Earth's development, but as one expression of a process that might have occurred elsewhere in forms we can barely imagine. This perspective didn't diminish human accomplishment, but contextualized it, suggesting that the emergence of consciousness might be not a freak accident, but a natural development of complex systems under certain conditions. Rare, perhaps, precious, certainly, but possibly not unique in the vastness of space and time. Children who grew up with this framework, who learned about the possibilities suggested by the 3I Atlas encounter, alongside the established facts of astronomy and biology, developed a relationship with the cosmos, different from previous generations. They inherited a universe not just of objects, but of potential subjects, not just of places, but of possible perspectives, not just of things to be observed, but of entities that might themselves be observers. This subtle shift in foundational metaphor from being the universe's sole known consciousness to being potentially one among many, influenced how these young minds conceptualized humanity's role and responsibilities as they matured into the scientists, policymakers, artists, and citizens who would shape the following decades. Educational curricula increasingly framed humanity as potential participants in a cosmic context rather than as the pinnacle of evolution. Environmental discussions considered the preservation of Earth's biosphere not just for future human generations, but as protection of a rare and precious phenomenon that might have significance beyond our own species' interests. Technological development increasingly considered how human achievements might be perceived or understood by non-human intelligence. In university departments and research institutions, in corporate laboratories and government agencies, the possibility of eventually sharing knowledge with non-human minds influenced long-term planning and priority setting, not as immediate concern but as distant, possibility worth considering in decisions with multi-generational impact. The development of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced materials science fields that might someday enable meaningful interstellar communication received additional attention not just for their practical applications on Earth, but for their potential role in humanity's future relationship with whatever intelligence might exist beyond our world. Environmental protection acquired an additional dimension beyond the preservation of human habitat or ethical treatment of terrestrial species. The recognition that Earth's biosphere represented a rare and possibly unique expression of the universe's capacity to generate complex, self-sustaining systems of interconnected life. If such systems were uncommon in the cosmos, then their preservation became not merely a local responsibility, but a matter of cosmic significance. The protection of something precious, not just to humanity, but to the universe itself. This perspective didn't replace practical or ethical arguments for environmental stewardship, but added another layer of meaning, another context in which human decisions could be evaluated. International relations, too, felt the subtle influence of the cosmic perspective the Three-Eye Atlas encounter had encouraged. The recognition that humanity might someday be understood as a single entity by non-human intelligence emphasized the arbitrary nature of national boundaries, the fundamental commonality of human experience, despite cultural and political differences. This didn't eliminate geopolitical tensions or resolve long-standing conflicts, but it provided an additional framework within which to consider them, a reminder that from sufficient distance, the divisions that seem so significant from within human society might appear as minor variations within a single planetary civilization. In diplomatic discussions, in international agreements, in the gradual evolution of global governance structures, this perspective occasionally manifested as reference point, not determining specific policies, but influencing the context in which they were formulated. Treaties governing space exploration, regulations for potential interstellar messaging, protocols for handling future anomalous objects. These developed with awareness that humanity's internal divisions might someday need to be transcended, at least partially, if meaningful participation in a broader cosmic community ever became possible. This influence remained subtle, more philosophical than practical in most instances, yet it represented a genuine shift in how some portion of humanity conceptualized its collective identity and potential future, even in the absence of definitive proof that Three-Eye Atlas represented contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The serious consideration of that possibility had permanently expanded humanity's moral and conceptual horizon, had induced a cosmic perspective that viewed human activity in a broader context than just its immediate consequences for our own species. We had begun, however tentatively, to think of ourselves as potentially having responsibilities and relationships beyond Earth, as members of a community that might extend beyond the boundaries of our own world. This expansion manifested in philosophical discourse, in ethical frameworks, in the language used to discuss humanity's long-term future. Concepts like cosmic significance, interstellar ethics, and multi-species perspectives entered academic and eventually popular vocabulary, not as commonly used terms but as available reference points for discussions about humanity's place and purpose. The most profound impact was not on specific decisions, but on the frames of reference within which decisions were considered, the addition of a cosmic context to the already complex matrix of economic, social, political, and ethical factors that influence human choices at both individual and collective levels. This expansion of perspective didn't resolve the difficult questions humanity faced, but enriched the conceptual resources available for addressing them, offering additional dimensions of meaning within which to evaluate potential paths forward. The Three-Eye Atlas encounter had not provided answers, but had expanded the range of questions considered relevant to human existence, had added, what might our actions mean in a cosmic context? To the already challenging questions of what they mean for ourselves, our societies, our planet, and future human generations. This cosmic perspective influenced long-term thinking about humanity's future, about the paths our technological and social development might follow, about the values that might guide decisions with multi-generational impact. The possibility that intelligence existed beyond Earth encouraged consideration of how human civilization might appear to external observers, not from fear of judgment but from recognition that certain developmental trajectories might facilitate eventual meaningful contact while others might preclude it. If technological civilizations elsewhere had solved problems humanity still struggled with, sustainable energy production, ecological balance, social cooperation at planetary scale, then the possibility of someday learning from their experience provided additional motivation for addressing these challenges. If, conversely, certain developmental paths had proven unsuccessful for intelligence elsewhere, perhaps leading to self-destruction or stagnation, then awareness of these possibilities might help humanity avoid similar outcomes. These considerations didn't determine specific technological or social choices, but added another dimension to their evaluation, another context in which to assess their long-term implications. The most significant impact was on time frames, encouraging thought about humanity's development, not just across decades or centuries, but across millennia or longer. The scales at which meaningful interstellar contact might become possible. This expansion of temporal perspective, this willingness to consider humanity's story as potentially unfolding across cosmic rather than merely historical timescales, represented perhaps the most profound legacy of the Three-Eye Atlas encounter, a quiet challenge to the short-term thinking that had characterized much of modern human society. In observatories and research institutions, in the quiet hours when the public discussions had faded and only the data remained, scientists continued their patient analysis of everything Three-Eye Atlas had left behind. New computational techniques applied to the original observations sometimes revealed patterns not previously detected, suggesting layers of information that initial analysis had missed. As understanding of complex systems and nonlinear dynamics advanced, researchers found new ways to interpret the comet's emissions, new frameworks for understanding how information might be encoded in apparently chaotic signals. This ongoing research proceeded without the public attention that had surrounded the original encounter, but with a steady commitment to extracting every possible insight from what remained our only potential contact with intelligence beyond Earth. In climate-controlled archives, the original data was preserved with meticulous care. Raw recordings from radio telescopes, spectrographic analyses, high-resolution imagery, all maintained in multiple formats to ensure their accessibility to future generations regardless of technological change. Around these primary sources accumulated layers of analysis, papers published in scientific journals, dissertations exploring specific aspects of the encounter, comparative studies examining the Three-Eye Atlas data alongside observations of subsequent interstellar visitors. This growing body of work represented a kind of ongoing conversation with the absent visitor, an attempt to extract meaning from its brief passage through our awareness, to understand what it might have been trying to communicate, if indeed communication was its purpose. The work required patience, humility, and openness to possibilities beyond current understanding, qualities not always associated with scientific endeavor, but essential for this particular investigation, which operated at the boundaries of established knowledge. The research unfolded across decades rather than months, a patient accumulation of understanding rather than a dramatic breakthrough. Each generation of scientists brought new analytical tools, new theoretical frameworks, new questions to the data, finding patterns their predecessors had missed, proposing interpretations that earlier analyses had not considered. Young researchers whose grandparents had been children during the actual encounter approached the archived observations with fresh perspective, unencumbered by the assumptions and expectations that had shaped initial responses. They applied techniques developed for entirely different purposes, algorithms designed to analyze quantum systems, methods created to model complex ecological relationships, frameworks developed to understand emergent properties in neural networks, and found in these approaches new ways to perceive structure within what had previously appeared as noise. The Three-Eye Atlas data became a kind of touchstone for methodological innovation, a complex, ambiguous dataset against which new analytical techniques could be tested a challenge that required integration of insights from multiple disciplines. This process wasn't linear but recursive, each new discovery prompting re-examination of previous conclusions, each theoretical advance suggesting new questions to ask of the original observations. The accumulating insights didn't converge toward a single definitive interpretation, but rather revealed multiple layers of pattern, multiple possible meanings, multiple frameworks within which the encounter might be understood. This plurality wasn't a failure of analysis, but a reflection of the phenomenon's inherent complexity, its resistance to reduction to any single explanatory framework, its existence at the intersection of multiple domains of understanding. In this extended time frame, certain patterns began to emerge more clearly, connections between the comet's emissions and its physical structure, correlations between its trajectory adjustments, and changes in signal patterns. These connections suggested an integration of message and messenger more complete than initially recognized, as if the comet itself was not merely carrying a communication, but embodying it, its entire existence a form of expression. When researchers combined analyses of the comet's electromagnetic emissions with detailed models of its internal structure reconstructed from fragmentary observations during moments when its icy surface had partially sublimated, they discovered correlations too precise to be coincidental. Certain signal patterns corresponded with specific structural configurations, changes in transmission frequency, aligned with adjustments in the object's rotation. Variations in signal strength correlated with exposure of particular internal components to solar radiation. These relationships suggested a system in which physical, form and information transmission were not separate functions but aspects of a single integrated process, a unity of structure and communication, more complete than any human-designed system had achieved. This integration challenged conventional distinctions between medium and message, between physical object and transmitted information, suggesting a mode of communication in which these distinctions might be meaningless, in which the traditional human concept of sending a signal using a separate transmission mechanism might be replaced by a more holistic embodiment of meaning in physical form. If this was indeed communication from non-human intelligence, it operated according to principles fundamentally different from human communication technology, not improving upon our methods, but exploring entirely different conceptual territory. This perspective led to new questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical form, questions about whether awareness might exist in configurations utterly unlike our biological understanding of life, whether intelligence might manifest in temporal and spatial scales vastly different from human experience. The investigation had moved beyond the specific question of whether 3I Atlas was natural or artificial, into more nuanced territory, into exploration of possibilities that transcended that binary distinction, that suggested categories of existence for which our current language lacks precise terms. Perhaps the comet represented neither purely natural phenomenon nor artificial construct, but something that existed in the conceptual space between these categories, an entity that had emerged through processes beyond current human understanding, that combined aspects of what we would classify separately as evolved and designed. Perhaps it represented intelligence manifesting not through biology as we understand it, not through cellular structures, metabolic processes, neurological systems, but through configurations of matter and energy that achieved complexity sufficient for awareness through entirely different pathways. Perhaps its consciousness, if indeed it possessed something analogous to what humans call consciousness, operated on timescales vastly different from human thought. Perhaps what appeared to us as a single transmission extended over months represented for it the equivalent of a momentary utterance. Or conversely, what we perceived as instantaneous signal might for it unfold across subjective durations we would experience as years. These speculations weren't idle philosophy but serious scientific consideration of how intelligence might manifest in forms beyond human experience, attempts to expand conceptual frameworks to accommodate possibilities that existing categories might exclude. The most innovative research in this domain came from collaboration between astronomers, complexity theorists, and researchers in artificial intelligence, scientists working at the boundaries of their respective fields to develop new frameworks for understanding how consciousness might emerge in non-biological systems. They explored mathematical models of self-organizing complexity, theories of information processing in distributed networks, concepts of emergent cognition in systems without centralized control mechanisms. These investigations weren't specific to the Three-Eye Atlas phenomenon, but were informed by it, by the possibility that in this visitor from interstellar space, humanity might have encountered not just evidence of intelligence beyond Earth, but evidence of intelligence structured according to principles fundamentally different from terrestrial biology. If consciousness could emerge through pathways entirely unlike Earth's evolutionary history, if awareness could exist in forms beyond the neural structures that support human thought, then the search for intelligence beyond our planet would need to expand. Beyond seeking analogues to terrestrial life, it would need to consider possibilities as yet unimagined, forms of existence that might register in our instruments as anomalous patterns, but that we might not immediately recognize as evidence of consciousness. This perspective didn't abandon scientific rigor but expanded its scope, maintaining strict standards of evidence while acknowledging that the phenomena being investigated might transcend existing conceptual frameworks. The research proceeded with disciplined imagination, with willingness to consider possibilities beyond current understanding, while insisting that these possibilities be consistent with observational data and theoretical principles. Certain aspects of the Three-Eye Atlas phenomenon remained particularly resistant to explanation, clusters of data that defied integration into existing theoretical frameworks. Among these was the apparent ability of the comet's emissions to synchronize with Earth's transmissions across distances. That should have imposed significant light speed delays, as if the visitor somehow anticipated our signals rather than merely responding to them. The temporal relationship between Earth's transmissions and the comet's responses defied conventional understanding of causality in space of the time required for signals to travel across the millions of kilometers separating the communicating entities. In some instances, the comet's emissions appeared to adjust to variations in Earth's transmission pattern before those variations could possibly have reached it at light speed. In others, its signals seemed delayed beyond what distance alone would explain. This temporal anomaly suggested possibilities ranging from the mundane, sophisticated prediction algorithms to the exotic manipulation of space-time relationships not accounted for in current physics. Perhaps the visitor possessed predictive capacity beyond current human capability. Perhaps it had observed Earth long enough to model our communication patterns with sufficient accuracy to anticipate likely variations. Perhaps it utilized quantum entanglement or similar phenomena to achieve what appeared to be faster-than-light information transfer. Perhaps its relationship with time differed fundamentally from human experience, operating according to principles that allowed it to perceive or process temporal relationships in ways our physics had not yet incorporated. Or perhaps the apparent synchronization was itself an illusion, a pattern human analysis had imposed on data that actually reflected entirely different causal relationships. Each of these possibilities challenged some aspect of current understanding, requiring either extension of existing theoretical frameworks or acknowledgement of their limitations when applied to phenomena at the boundaries of known physics. Another persistent mystery was the comet's composition, the presence of isotopic ratios and molecular configurations that, according to our understanding of cosmic chemistry, should not naturally occur in the combinations observed. Spectrographic analysis had revealed elements in proportions inconsistent with any known stellar nucleosynthesis process, combinations that, according to current models, would require material from multiple types of supernovae to be mixed in proportions and under conditions virtually impossible to achieve through random cosmic processes. Certain molecular structures within the comet exhibited chirality, the property of asymmetry that makes a structure distinct from its mirror image, with distributions that defied statistical expectations. In terrestrial biology, certain molecules show strong preference for particular chiral configurations, a property associated with life's chemical processes. In non-biological contexts, chiral molecules typically occur in equal proportions of both configurations. The comet displayed chiral preferences in certain compounds, but in patterns unlike those found in Earth's biology, suggesting either unknown natural processes capable of generating such preferences or deliberate molecular engineering beyond current human capability. These compositional anomalies were not proof of artificial origin, but they established boundary conditions that any successful natural explanation would need to satisfy, conditions that strained existing models of stellar nucleosynthesis and interstellar material processing. Whatever 3I Atlas was, however it had formed, its very substance challenged current understanding of cosmic chemistry, requiring either expansion of existing theoretical frameworks or acknowledgement that entirely unknown processes might operate in interstellar space. Most intriguing was the mathematical structure of the signals themselves, patterns that exhibited properties of both order and randomness simultaneously, that contained recursive elements suggesting self-reference, that demonstrated information density approaching theoretical limits for their bandwidth. When analyzed using tools from information theory, the comet's emissions displayed statistical properties unlike either known natural phenomena or human-generated signals, occupying a unique position in the spectrum between complete randomness and rigid order. They contained nested patterns within patterns, hierarchical structures reminiscent of both fractal mathematics and formal language systems. Certain sequences appeared to reference earlier transmissions, to incorporate elements of previous signals in ways that suggested not just memory but deliberate self-reference, a quality associated with advanced information processing systems. The overall information density, the amount of non-random data transmitted per unit of energy expended, approached what information theory identified as the theoretical maximum efficiency for communication across noisy channels, suggesting either extraordinary coincidence or deliberate optimization beyond current human communication technology. These properties resembled those found in certain types of efficient coding used in advanced computing, in the information architecture of complex biological systems, and in some human-designed communication protocols optimized for noisy channels. The convergence of these mathematical properties across such diverse domains suggested the possibility of underlying principles, universal optima toward which any system of information processing might evolve or be designed, regardless of its physical substrate or origin. If this was the case, then the mathematics of 3I Atlas might represent not evidence of specific non-human intelligence, but rather evidence of universal constraints on how any intelligence, regardless of its nature, would structure efficient communication across vast distances and time frames. This possibility that certain patterns might emerge independently wherever intelligence developed, regardless of its specific form, became one of the most productive research directions inspired by the encounter. Mathematicians and information theorists explored the abstract properties of optimal communication systems, identifying structures that would theoretically emerge in any context where accurate transmission of complex information across distance was required. Computer scientists developed simulations of evolving communication protocols under various constraints, observing how certain structural features consistently emerged regardless of initial conditions. Linguists examined commonalities across human languages despite their independent development, seeking principles that might extend beyond Earth to any system for encoding and transmitting meaning. These investigations suggested that if intelligence existed beyond our world, its methods of communication might share certain mathematical properties with human systems, not because of common origin, but because these properties represented optimal solutions to the universal challenge of transferring information across distance with minimal loss. In this framework, the patterns observed in the 3I Atlas emissions might represent not a specific language to be decoded, but evidence of convergent evolution in communication systems, manifestation of mathematical principles that any sufficiently advanced intelligence would discover and implement, regardless of its biological or technological nature. This perspective offered a potential bridge across what might otherwise seem an unbridgeable gap between radically different forms of consciousness, the possibility that despite potentially vast differences in sensory experience, cognitive architecture, or evolutionary history, intelligent systems might converge towards certain common principles when attempting to communicate across interstellar distances. As our solar system continued its eternal journey through the galaxy, as Earth traced its orbit around the Sun year after year, the memory of 3I Atlas gradually transformed, from immediate experience to historical event, from scientific data to cultural narrative. The transformation occurred not through deliberate reinterpretation, but through the natural evolution of collective memory, the process by which events are incorporated into the stories cultures tell about themselves and their place in the world. For those who had experienced the encounter directly, the astronomers who first detected the anomalous signals, the researchers who analyzed the data, the public who had followed the unfolding discovery through media reports, it remained a discrete episode, a specific sequence of observations and responses. For the generation that followed, who learned of it through educational materials, documentary accounts, and the reminiscences of their elders, it became something different, a symbol, a reference point, a moment when humanity's understanding of its cosmic context had shifted in subtle but significant ways. For those born decades later, who encountered it first as history rather than current events, it acquired the quality of origin story, a narrative about how their understanding of humanity's place in the universe had been shaped by events before their birth. With each successive generation, the empirical details, the specific frequencies of transmission, the precise isotopic ratios in the comet's composition, the statistical analyses of signal patterns, receded in cultural importance, while the conceptual implications, the possibility of non-human intelligence, the potential for communication across interstellar gulfs, the expansion of perspective beyond Earth-centered frames of reference became increasingly central to how the event was remembered and referenced. This wasn't distortion but transformation, the natural process by which events move from the domain of immediate experience to that of cultural meaning. What remained constant through this transformation was the sense of possibility the visitor had awakened, the awareness that the void between stars might not be empty, but filled with messages we had not yet learned to hear, with presences we had not yet learned to recognize. This possibility manifested differently across various segments of society, filtered through diverse cultural and intellectual frameworks. For the scientific community, it represented an expanded research agenda, new questions to investigate, new methodologies to develop, new theoretical frameworks to explore. For philosophers and theologians, it offered fresh perspective on ancient questions about humanity's place and purpose, about whether consciousness is unique to Earth or a phenomenon that might emerge wherever conditions permit sufficient complexity. For artists and writers, it provided new metaphorical territory, new ways to explore themes of communication and isolation, of encounter with otherness, of the relationship between intelligence and the physical forms that support it. For educators, it created opportunities to frame human knowledge within broader cosmic context, to present Earth's story not as self-contained narrative but as potentially one chapter in a more extensive account of how consciousness emerges and evolves throughout the universe. For ordinary individuals with no professional connection to these domains, it simply altered the feeling of looking up at the night sky, transformed the experience from contemplation of beautiful but indifferent celestial mechanics to awareness of potential connection, of possible presence beyond the visible lights overhead. For some, this possibility was primarily scientific, a hypothesis to investigate through rigorous methodology and careful observation. They approached it with disciplined skepticism, demanding evidence that met strict criteria for distinguishing genuine pattern from projection or coincidence. They developed statistical models for evaluating signal complexity, experimental protocols for testing alternative explanations, theoretical frameworks for distinguishing natural phenomena from potential evidence of intelligence. Their work unfolded in the measured language of academic papers, in the careful procedures of observational astronomy. in the mathematical precision of information theory. They acknowledged the profound implications of potential contact with non-human intelligence, while insisting that such claims required equally profound evidential support, that the extraordinary nature of the hypothesis demanded extraordinary standards of proof. This approach wasn't rejection of possibility, but respect for its significance, recognition that claims of such consequence deserved the most rigorous evaluation human methodology could provide. Whether they ultimately considered the Three-Eye Atlas phenomena evidence of intelligence beyond Earth, or merely unusual natural processes not yet fully understood, their investigation expanded human knowledge, developed new techniques for analyzing complex patterns, new frameworks for evaluating information content in signals from space, new perspectives on how consciousness might manifest in forms beyond familiar biology. For others, the encounter's significance was philosophical, a catalyst for reconsidering fundamental questions about consciousness, intelligence, and humanity's relationship with the cosmos. If awareness could exist in forms utterly unlike terrestrial biology, what did this suggest about the nature of consciousness itself? If intelligence could develop through evolutionary pathways entirely different from Earth's, how might this expand our understanding of mind's relationship to matter? If communication could occur between entities with radically different sensory experiences and conceptual frameworks, what might this reveal about the nature of meaning and understanding? These questions weren't new. Philosophers had explored similar territory for centuries, but the Three-Eye Atlas encounter gave them fresh urgency and context, transforming them from abstract speculation to considerations with potential practical significance. Philosophical discourse around these issues didn't seek definitive answers, but rather expanded the conceptual frameworks within which such questions might be considered, developing more nuanced understanding of how consciousness relates to physical substrate, how intelligence might manifest in diverse forms, how communication might function across radical difference. This philosophical exploration proceeded alongside scientific investigation, not competing with empirical methodology, but complementing it, providing conceptual clarity about what was being sought, what might constitute evidence, what implications various findings might carry for human self-understanding. Together, scientific and philosophical approaches created a more comprehensive response to the encounter than either could have achieved alone. Empirical rigor combined with conceptual depth, observational precision with interpretive nuance. For many people without specific professional connection to science or philosophy, the encounter's meaning was more personal, a quiet alteration in how they perceived their place in the cosmos, a subtle shift in their relationship with the night sky. It manifested in ordinary moments, in the feeling of looking up on clear nights and wondering, in conversations about whether humanity is alone, in speculations about what forms intelligence might take on worlds orbiting the visible stars overhead. It influenced not daily decisions or practical matters, but something more fundamental, the background understanding against which such matters are contextualized, the implicit framework within which individual lives acquire meaning. This impact was not dramatic but cumulative, a gradual incorporation of cosmic perspective into personal worldview, a quiet expansion of the context within which human existence is understood. It didn't replace existing sources of meaning, family connections, cultural traditions, spiritual beliefs, personal accomplishments, but added another dimension to them, another frame of reference within which their significance could be considered. For most people, this additional perspective operated at the periphery of awareness rather than its center, not a daily preoccupation, but an occasional reminder, a moment of expanded perspective amid ordinary concerns. Yet even this peripheral awareness represented a significant shift from earlier generations. Relationship with the cosmos, from viewing the universe as magnificent but irrelevant backdrop to human affairs to recognizing it as potential context for connection, for communication, for participation in something beyond purely terrestrial significance. Whether Three-Eye Atlas was messenger or mirage, whether it carried communication from beyond or merely reflected our own hopes back to us, it had changed how humanity perceived its place in the cosmos, had replaced certainty with possibility, isolation with potential connection. The visitor had come like a question written across the sky, and in attempting to answer, we had discovered new questions, new ways of asking about our place among the stars. This process continued long after the comet itself had vanished from our instrument's range. The questions it had raised generating new methodologies, new theoretical frameworks, new perspectives on phenomena both astronomical and philosophical. The search for similar patterns in other cosmic contexts, in the emissions from distant stars, in the structure of interstellar clouds, in the behavior of objects within our own solar system, continued with increasing sophistication, informed by what had been learned from the original encounter. The development of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced materials science fields that might someday enable more comprehensive analysis of cosmic signals or more effective transmission of messages beyond our world, proceeded with awareness of their potential. Application to interstellar communication, their possible role in humanity's future relationship with whatever consciousness might exist beyond Earth. The philosophical exploration of what constitutes intelligence, how awareness might manifest in non-biological contexts. What principles might underlie communication between radically different forms of consciousness, continued in academic discourse, artistic expression, and popular discussion, enriching human conceptual resources for understanding both ourselves and potential others. In all these domains, the impact of the encounter wasn't revolutionary but evolutionary. Not dramatic paradigm shift, but gradual expansion of perspective, methodological innovation, conceptual framework. The comet itself had returned to the darkness from which it emerged, following its trajectory toward distant stars that humans would never see up close. But the ripples of its passing continued to move through human consciousness. Waves of possibility, expanding outward from that brief moment of potential contact, altering shorelines of thought in ways both subtle and profound. Like all transformative encounters, its significance lay not just in what had happened, but in what might happen, in possibilities awakened, pathways opened, perspectives shifted. The empirical question of whether 3i Atlas had indeed carried communication from non-human intelligence remained open, neither definitively answered in the affirmative nor conclusively dismissed, but the conceptual space the encounter had created remained accessible regardless of its ultimate resolution. Humanity had glimpsed, however briefly and ambiguously, the possibility of connection beyond Earth, had considered, with seriousness and methodological rigor, that consciousness might exist in forms beyond our planet's biology, that communication might occur across interstellar distances and radical difference. This consideration itself, this willingness to expand perspective beyond terrestrial frames of reference, represented a significant development in human thought, a quiet step toward more comprehensive understanding of our place in the cosmos, our relationship with whatever other consciousness might exist within it. Whether or not actual contact had occurred, the serious contemplation of its possibility had permanently altered how at least some portion of humanity conceptualized its cosmic context and potential future. On rare, clear nights, when the veil of human light pollution thins and the full depth of the cosmos reveals itself, people still look up with a new quality of attention, a heightened awareness that the pinpricks of light overhead are not merely distant suns, but potential neighborhoods, possible homes for other consciousnesses engaged in their own contemplation of existence. In remote locations where darkness still reigns after sunset, where the Milky Way still appears as river of light crossing the sky, this awareness becomes almost tangible, a felt sense of potential presence beyond the visible stars, of possible connection across the void. Astronomy enthusiasts, setting up telescopes on hillsides, families spreading blankets in backyards for meteor shower viewing, hikers pausing on mountain trails as evening deepens, all occasionally experience moments when the intellectual understanding that other minds might exist beyond Earth transforms into intuitive recognition, into emotional resonance with that possibility. These moments aren't mystical experiences or departures from rationality, but rather instances when abstract knowledge becomes concrete feeling, when intellectual appreciation of cosmic scale and potential. Complexity resolves into direct awareness of what these concepts might mean for human relationship with the universe? Such experiences have occurred throughout human history. The night sky has always inspired wonder, has always suggested possibilities beyond immediate surroundings, but the Three-Eye Atlas encounter added specificity to this wonder, transformed vague speculation into concrete consideration based on actual observation and analysis. The possibility that had always existed as philosophical abstraction or science fiction premise acquired the weight of empirical investigation, the substance of methodological rigor, the specificity of particular patterns observed and analyzed with precision instruments. This transformation didn't resolve the fundamental question of whether consciousness exists beyond Earth, but made its consideration more grounded, more precise, more integrated with broader scientific understanding of cosmic processes and evolutionary development. The Three-Eye Atlas encounter had not provided definitive proof that we are not alone, but it had made the possibility tangible, had transformed abstract speculation into concrete investigation. In that transformation, something had shifted in humanity's relationship with the night sky, a change not of knowledge but of perspective, a new way of looking that saw not just stars and planets and the occasional comet, but a landscape of potential connection, a vast territory where messages might be traveling between minds, separated by gulfs of space and time. This altered perception manifested differently across various domains of human activity, in the scientific methodologies developed to detect potential patterns in cosmic emissions, in the philosophical frameworks elaborated to consider consciousness beyond familiar biology, in the artistic expressions that explored themes of communication across difference, in the educational approaches that presented human existence within broader cosmic context. It influenced space exploration priorities, research funding allocations, technological development trajectories, not dramatically reorienting these activities, but subtly shifting their emphasis, their underlying rationales, their long-term objectives. Most significantly, it influenced how at least some portion of humanity conceptualized its place and purpose, not replacing existing sources of meaning, but adding another dimension to them, another context within which to consider questions of significance, value, and direction. The possibility that consciousness exists beyond Earth, that communication might someday occur across interstellar distances, that humanity might eventually participate in conversation extending beyond our planet. These considerations didn't resolve existential questions, but expanded the frameworks within which such questions are formulated and explored. This perspective was neither naive hope nor baseless fantasy, but a measured openness, a willingness to consider possibilities beyond current understanding, while maintaining the rigorous standards of evidence that genuine knowledge requires. It balanced wonder with skepticism, imagination with analysis, the ancient human impulse to see meaning in the stars with the modern scientific commitment to distinguishing pattern from projection. It acknowledged both the profound significance of potential contact with non-human intelligence and the need for extraordinary evidence to support such extraordinary claims. It recognized that while the Three-Eye Atlas encounter had not provided conclusive proof of communication from beyond Earth, it had presented patterns sufficiently complex and ordered to justify continued investigation, to warrant development of more sensitive instruments, more sophisticated analytical methods, more nuanced theoretical frameworks for understanding what might constitute evidence of consciousness manifesting in forms beyond familiar biology. This balanced perspective represented neither belief nor disbelief, but rather disciplined openness, willingness to follow evidence where it leads, while maintaining awareness of how human perception tends to find patterns even in random data, how human desire for connection might influence interpretation of ambiguous signals. It combined the wonder essential for imagining possibilities beyond current understanding with the methodological rigor necessary for distinguishing genuine discovery from projection or coincidence. In finding this balance, in holding both possibility and uncertainty in the same thought, humanity had perhaps taken its first step into a more mature relationship with the cosmos, a relationship characterized not by the childhood certainty that we are either alone or accompanied, but by the adult recognition that some questions remain open, some answers provisional, some knowledge perpetually in process rather than finally achieved. The most significant legacy of the Three-Eye Atlas encounter may prove to be neither scientific discovery nor philosophical insight, but this evolution in perspective, this development of more nuanced, more balanced approach to considering humanity's place in the cosmos. The traditional binary, either we are alone in the universe or we have definitive evidence of other intelligence, expanded into more complex territory that acknowledged degrees of uncertainty, levels of evidence, ranges of possibility. The question transformed from "are we alone?" to more specific inquiries. What forms might consciousness take beyond Earth? How might intelligence develop through evolutionary pathways unlike our own? What principles might govern communication between radically different types of awareness? What responsibilities might arise from potential participation in interstellar exchange of knowledge? These questions didn't replace the fundamental inquiry about whether other intelligence exists, but contextualized it within broader investigation of what such existence might entail, what forms it might take, what implications it might carry for human self-understanding and future development. This evolution represented growth in conceptual sophistication, an expansion of the frameworks within which humanity considers its relationship with whatever consciousness might exist beyond our world. Like all genuine growth, it manifested not as dramatic revolution, but as gradual development, not replacing previous understanding, but incorporating it within more comprehensive perspective that acknowledged both the possibility of connection beyond Earth and the methodological challenges involved in establishing such connection with certainty. Perhaps every comet is a question, a query written in ice and dust, traveling between worlds, carrying in its frozen heart the possibility of connection. These wanderers through the interstellar dark have always invited human wonder, have always suggested journeys beyond familiar boundaries. In ancient times, people saw in them portents and omens, messages from powers beyond human understanding, indications of cosmic significance attached to terrestrial events. In modern era, scientific understanding transformed comets from supernatural messengers to natural phenomena, objects whose movements follow gravitational laws, whose composition reflects chemical processes operating throughout the universe. The Three-Eye Atlas encounter suggested yet another possibility, that these travelers between stars might indeed be messengers, not of supernatural intent, but of intelligence that evolved or developed beyond our world, consciousness that might communicate across interstellar distances through methods we are only beginning to comprehend. This possibility doesn't contradict scientific understanding, but extends it, acknowledges that within natural processes might exist phenomena beyond current human knowledge, patterns that reflect not supernatural intervention, but forms of organization, of complexity, of awareness that our science has not yet fully incorporated. The comets passing through our solar system, whether carrying messages or merely their own silent stories of formation and journey, remind us of the vastness beyond our world, the possibilities that exist in the darkness between stars, the potential for discovery that remains despite centuries of astronomical observation and analysis. They are questions that appear briefly in our sky, they then return to the void, leaving us to consider what they might mean, what they might contain, what they might reveal about the universe beyond our experience. And perhaps every planet where consciousness has emerged is an answer still forming, still learning to articulate itself across the immensity of space. Earth has harbored awareness for the briefest moment of cosmic time, a few billion years of biological evolution producing, only in the most recent eye blink, intelligence capable of contemplating its own origins and potential future. Our technology for communicating beyond our world remains in earliest infancy. Radio signals that have traveled less than a century into space, spacecraft that have barely crossed the threshold of our solar system, messages deliberately transmitted toward distant stars that may never be received or recognized. We are answer still struggling to find its voice, consciousness trying to extend its awareness beyond the boundaries of its birthplace, intelligence seeking connection across gulfs of distance that our bodies cannot cross but our signals might eventually span. If other worlds harbor their own forms of awareness, their own expressions of the universe's capacity to develop systems complex enough for self-reflection, then they too may be engaged in similar processes, evolving communication methods, developing technologies for extending their presence beyond planetary boundaries, seeking contact with whatever other consciousness might exist among the stars. The universe may contain countless such answers in various stages of development. Some just beginning to recognize their cosmic context, others having communicated across interstellar distances for millions or billions of years, still others having discovered principles of connection that human science has not yet approached. In this perspective, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence becomes not just empirical investigation, but participation in cosmic process, humanity adding its voice to whatever conversation might already be occurring, contributing its unique experience and understanding to exchange that might extend throughout the galaxy or beyond. In those quiet hours when night deepens and stars wheel overhead, when human activity subsides and silence spreads like still water, we might imagine the conversation continuing, signals passing between distant points of awareness, messages encoded in light and gravity, and the subtle mathematics of existence itself. We might consider that we are not merely observers of the cosmos, but participants in its ongoing dialogue, adding our voice to a discussion that began long before our species evolved and will continue long after our sun has burned through its hydrogen and expanded into its red giant phase. From this perspective, the significance of human existence lies not in dominion over our planet, not in technological achievement measured against our own past capabilities, not even in the knowledge we accumulate during our civilization's lifespan, but in our potential contribution to this larger conversation, this exchange between forms of awareness that might extend throughout the universe. Our particular evolutionary history, our specific sensory apparatus, our unique cognitive architecture, these give us perspective unlike any other intelligence that might exist, allow us to perceive aspects of reality that other forms of consciousness might miss or interpret differently. Our art, our science, our philosophy, our understanding of ourselves and our world, these represent not just human accomplishment, but potential contribution to exchange that might transcend the boundaries of any single species or civilization. If communication across interstellar distances ever becomes practical reality, rather than theoretical possibility, if humanity someday participates in genuine exchange with intelligence beyond Earth, then our value will lie not in our technological sophistication, which may be minimal compared to older civilizations, but in our unique perspective, our particular way of experiencing and interpreting existence, our specific understanding of what it means to be conscious in the form that evolution has given us. For what is consciousness, if not the universe's way of perceiving itself? What is communication, if not existence acknowledging existence across the void? In reaching toward the stars, in listening for whispers from the dark, we are not seeking something foreign, but recognizing something familiar. The same pattern of being that pulses within our own awareness. The rhythm of existence that binds all things, from interstellar comets to the quiet thoughts of creatures gazing upward into the endless night. This recognition doesn't reduce consciousness to materialist mechanism, but rather elevates matter to participant in, meaning acknowledges that the same processes that produced awareness on Earth may have generated it elsewhere, that the capacity for self-reflection may be not unique anomaly, but natural development of sufficiently complex systems under certain conditions. The metals in our blood, the carbon in our cells, the nitrogen in our DNA, all were forged in stellar furnaces, scattered through space when those stars died, gathered into our planet during its formation, incorporated into biology through billions of years of evolution. We are, in most literal sense, made of stardust, composed of elements created in cosmic processes that occurred long before our solar system existed. If consciousness has emerged elsewhere, it too must be composed of the same fundamental materials, must have developed through processes operating according to the same physical laws, must exist within the same universe, governed by the same fundamental principles. The details may differ dramatically. The particular biochemistry, the specific sensory apparatus, the unique evolutionary pathway, but the underlying reality remains. Consciousness beyond Earth would be not alien presence, but another expression of the same cosmic tendency toward increasing complexity, another instance of the universe developing capacity to perceive and reflect upon itself. Perhaps the true message of 3i Atlas was not contained in its electromagnetic pulses or its crystalline structures, but in the very fact of its passing, in the reminder that the universe is vast beyond comprehension, yet connected through the fundamental patterns of energy and information, of matter and meaning, that flow through all things. The visitor from interstellar space, whether carrying deliberate communication or merely exhibiting natural properties beyond current understanding, demonstrated the limits of existing knowledge while simultaneously suggesting possibilities beyond those limits. It revealed not just specific phenomena to investigate, but attitude toward investigation itself, an approach that balances disciplined skepticism with genuine openness, that combines methodological rigor with conceptual flexibility, that acknowledges both the necessity of evidence and the possibility of phenomena beyond current theoretical frameworks. This balanced perspective represents perhaps the most valuable legacy of the encounter. Not specific discoveries, but evolved approach to the process of discovery itself. Not answers, but more nuanced questions. Not certainty, but more sophisticated relationship with uncertainty. The universe revealed by modern science is both more comprehensible and more mysterious than earlier generations could have imagined, governed by principles, accessible to human understanding yet exhibiting complexity that transcends complete explanation, operating according to laws we can formulate mathematically, yet generating phenomena we struggle to incorporate into existing theoretical frameworks. The 3i Atlas encounter embodied this dual nature, presenting patterns ordered enough to suggest meaning yet complex enough to resist definitive interpretation, exhibiting properties that could be measured precisely yet defied integration into established explanatory models. In this tension between the comprehensible and the mysterious, between the explicable and the not yet explained, lies the frontier of human knowledge, the boundary between what we understand and what we might someday comprehend through evolved methodology and expanded conceptual frameworks. Perhaps, in the end, what we recognized in the visitor was not so much an other as a distant mirror, a reflection of the same cosmic processes that gave rise to our own existence, the same fundamental patterns expressing themselves in different forms across the immeasurable distances between stars. If 3i Atlas carried message from beyond Earth, if its patterns represented communication from intelligence that evolved or developed elsewhere, then that intelligence must share with humanity certain fundamental characteristics despite potentially vast differences in specific form or function. It must perceive pattern, must distinguish signal from noise, must conceptualize relationships across time and space, must organize information in ways that preserve meaning during transmission. These capacities may manifest through mechanisms utterly unlike human cognition, may operate according to principles beyond current scientific understanding, may exist within sensory and conceptual frameworks so different from our own that direct translation between them might prove impossible, yet they must exist in some form for communication to occur at all. In this sense, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is simultaneously search for the familiar within the strange, for points of commonality that might exist despite radical difference, for shared capacities that might enable exchange across boundaries of evolutionary history, physical form, and conceptual framework. If consciousness exists beyond Earth, it represents not complete otherness, but alternative expression of capacities that exist within humanity as well, different manifestation of the same fundamental potential for awareness, for pattern recognition, for meaning-making that characterizes human experience. In seeking connection beyond our world, we are looking not just outward but also inward, searching not just for other intelligence, but for deeper understanding of intelligence itself, of consciousness as phenomenon that might transcend the specific biological context in which we experience it. In the deepest silence of night, when even the memory of 3i Atlas has faded to a whisper in human consciousness, something remains, a quality of attention, a readiness to hear, an openness to wonder that the visitor awakened and that continues to shape how we listen to the cosmos. This attentiveness manifests in the radio telescope scanning distant stars for unusual emissions, in the optical instruments searching for evidence of technological activity around other suns, in the analytical algorithms processing astronomical data, for patterns too subtle for human perception alone. It exists in the philosophical frameworks developed to consider what communication across radical difference might entail, in the artistic expressions that explore themes of connection beyond terrestrial boundaries, in the educational approaches that present human existence within broader cosmic context. Most fundamentally, it persists in the quiet moments when individual humans look upward on clear nights and consider the possibility that across the darkness, visible between stars, other consciousness might exist, other awareness gazing back, other intelligence contemplating the same vast questions that human minds have formulated throughout our brief history, on this small planet orbiting an ordinary star in an unremarkable galaxy among billions. This possibility doesn't diminish human significance, but contextualizes it, places our existence, our awareness, our questioning within framework that acknowledges both our particularity and our potential participation in something that extends beyond the boundaries of our world, our species, our evolutionary lineage. We matter not because we are unique or central, but because we contribute specific perspective, particular understanding, unique voice to what might be broader conversation among diverse forms of consciousness throughout the universe, and perhaps somewhere in the darkness between stars, in the vast territories we will never physically reach, other consciousnesses maintain their own vigilance, their own patient attention to signals from distant worlds. Perhaps across the galaxy or beyond, awareness that evolved or developed through pathways utterly unlike Earth's maintains its own observational instruments, its own analytical methodologies, its own theoretical frameworks for distinguishing meaningful pattern from random noise. Perhaps these other observers have detected our presence, have noted the chemical signatures of biology in our atmosphere, the electromagnetic emissions of our technology, the gradual spread of our influence from planetary to solar system scale. Perhaps they wonder about us as we wonder about them, speculate about what forms consciousness might take on a small rocky world orbiting a yellow star near the edge of a spiral galaxy. Consider what perspectives might develop through evolution in such environment. Contemplate what contributions such awareness might eventually make to interstellar exchange of knowledge and understanding. Perhaps they too balance disciplined skepticism with genuine openness, acknowledge both the necessity of methodological rigor and the possibility of phenomena beyond their current theoretical frameworks. Combine careful analysis of observational data with conceptual flexibility about what might exist beyond their experience. Perhaps their instruments have detected our transmissions, our radio broadcasts traveling outward at light speed, how deliberate messages directed toward specific star systems, how spacecraft carrying information about our world and species into the interstellar void. Perhaps they have attempted to respond, have sent signals that our technology cannot yet detect, have dispatched messengers that we have not recognized as such, have established presence in our vicinity that our observational frameworks have not incorporated. Perhaps the true legacy of the visitor is this mutual listening, this shared awareness across unimaginable gulfs of space and difference, this recognition that in the fundamental experience of being, of perceiving, of seeking connection, there exists a kinship that transcends the specific forms consciousness might take. If intelligence exists beyond Earth, if awareness has emerged through processes unlike those that produced human consciousness, then despite potentially vast differences in physical form, sensory apparatus, cognitive architecture, and conceptual framework, certain commonalities must exist. Any system capable of distinguishing pattern from noise, of processing information about its environment, of communicating across distance, must possess capacities that human consciousness also exhibits, must engage in processes analogous, though perhaps not identical, to human perception, analysis, and expression. In this fundamental similarity, this shared capacity for awareness, for meaning-making, for communication, lies the possibility of eventual understanding across radical difference, of exchange between forms of intelligence that evolved or developed in complete isolation from each other. The specific languages, the particular technologies, the exact methodologies may differ dramatically, but the underlying reality of consciousness perceiving itself, of awareness reaching across boundaries to connect with other awareness, remains constant regardless of the specific forms through which it manifests. This recognition doesn't minimize the challenges involved in communicating across such differences. The practical difficulties of establishing contact across interstellar distances, the conceptual complexities of translating between radically different frameworks of understanding, the temporal issues created by communication limited to light speed or slower, but it suggests that such challenges might not be insurmountable, that the fundamental commonality of consciousness itself might provide foundation for eventual meaningful exchange. For all the scientific analysis, all the mathematical modeling, all the philosophical debate surrounding the three-eye atlas phenomenon, its deepest meaning might lie in this simple truth, that in a universe of overwhelming vastness and complexity, the impulse to reach outward, to send messages into the void, to listen for responses from the dark, might be the most profound commonality between forms of awareness, the thread that connects all who look up at alien skies and wonder who else might be looking back. This shared impulse, this tendency of consciousness to seek connection beyond itself, to wonder about other awareness that might exist beyond immediate experience, may transcend the specific biological, technological or social contexts in which intelligence develops. It may represent not cultural artifact, but fundamental characteristic of consciousness itself, the natural extension of awareness beyond immediate surroundings, the inevitable development of curiosity about what might exist beyond current knowledge. If this is true, if the impulse toward connection, toward communication across boundaries, toward expansion of understanding beyond immediate context is inherent to consciousness, regardless of its specific form, then the search for extraterrestrial intelligence represents not just scientific inquiry, but participation in universal process, engagement in activity that any sufficiently developed awareness anywhere might undertake. In listening for signals from beyond Earth, in sending our own messages into the void, in developing technologies that might someday enable direct exchange across interstellar distances, humanity joins what might be chorus of consciousness throughout the universe, adds its voice to conversation that may have been underway for billions of years before our species evolved, and may continue for billions after we are gone. Our significance lies not in being first or most advanced participants in this exchange, but simply in participating, in contributing our particular perspective, our specific understanding, our unique voice to what might be the most profound endeavor consciousness can undertake, the recognition of itself beyond the boundaries of its origin. Maybe we are all travelers, carrying messages we don't fully understand, moving through darkness toward meetings we cannot predict, but somehow sense awaiting us among the stars. Each consciousness a whisper in the void, each world a question seeking its answer in the silent embrace of cosmic night. Our journey began billions of years ago, when the elements that would eventually form Earth coalesced from the remnants of previous stars. It continued through the gradual emergence of biology, the evolution of nervous systems capable of processing information with increasing sophistication, the development of awareness that could reflect upon itself and contemplate its origins and potential future. It extends now beyond our planet, through our observations of distant phenomena, our transmissions carrying information about our existence, our spacecraft venturing into the interstellar void, carrying records of our world and species. It may someday include direct exchange with other forms of consciousness. Communication across differences more profound than any humanity has yet bridged, understanding that transcends the specific contexts of our evolution and history. Throughout this journey, we carry messages embedded in our very being, in the particular way consciousness has manifested through Earth's evolutionary history, in the specific understanding we have developed through scientific inquiry and philosophical reflection, in the unique perspectives we have gained through our existence on this small planet orbiting an ordinary star. These messages are not separate from us, but constitutive of us. Not information we transmit, but understanding we embody. Not content we communicate, but awareness we express through our very existence as conscious entities capable of contemplating our place in the cosmos and reaching toward connection beyond our world. In this sense, humanity itself is both messenger and message, both traveler through cosmic night and communication from one form of awareness to others that might exist among the countless stars overhead as we continue our journey, as we develop technologies that extend our presence beyond Earth As we refine methodologies for detecting potential signals from distant intelligence, as we elaborate conceptual frameworks for understanding consciousness beyond familiar biology, we carry with us both the specific knowledge accumulated throughout human history and the fundamental capacity for awareness that might be our deepest commonality with whatever other consciousness may exist throughout the universe. Our particular evolutionary history, our specific sensory apparatus, our unique cognitive architecture give us perspective unlike any other intelligence that might exist. Allow us to perceive aspects of reality that other forms of consciousness might miss or interpret differently. Yet beneath these differences lies potentially shared foundation, the fundamental experience of being aware, of processing information about environment, of seeking understanding beyond immediate context. In this tension between particularity and commonality, between the unique characteristics of human consciousness and the potentially universal properties of awareness itself, lies the most profound possibility suggested by the three-eye atlas encounter, that despite evolving in complete isolation from each other, despite potentially vast differences in physical form and cognitive function, despite conceptual frameworks shaped by entirely different evolutionary histories and planetary environments, consciousness throughout the universe might recognize itself across the darkness, might establish communication despite radical difference, might eventually share understanding that transcends the specific contexts of its various manifestations. In reaching toward this possibility, in developing the technologies and methodologies and conceptual frameworks that might someday enable such connection, humanity participates in what may be the universe's most significant endeavor: consciousness, discovering itself beyond the boundaries of its origin, awareness recognizing itself across the immeasurable gulfs of space and difference that separate the countless worlds where it might have emerged. Each consciousness a whisper in the void, each world a question seeking its answer in the silent embrace of cosmic night. And somewhere within that darkness, perhaps, the first tenuous connections forming between whispers that have traveled across distances measured in light years, the first tentative responses to questions that have echoed through the void for millennia, the first recognition across the gulf of evolution and development and conceptual framework that despite everything that separates us, we share the most fundamental experience of all: existence aware of itself, consciousness perceiving itself, awareness reaching toward connection beyond the boundaries of its birth. In this possibility, in this hope, this wonder, this patient listening, lies perhaps our deepest purpose and most profound potential as conscious entities in a universe, vast beyond comprehension yet connected, through the fundamental patterns of being that flow through all things. From interstellar comets to the quiet thoughts of creatures gazing upward into the endless night.